Hello, Rob, the editor of the Biomedical Scientist magazine here. Welcome to the new podcast from the IBMS. Each episode of this series is based on the IBMS chats that we host on Twitter Spaces on the first Wednesday of every month. First up, we have Malcolm Robinson, the founder of Harvey's Gang, an initiative that was set up to provide lab tours for young patients undergoing intensive treatment for severe diseases. We then speak to biomedical scientists Zoe Andrews and Rebecca Whitehouse about their experiences of running Harvey's Gang tours. It's quite an emotional one, and it was fantastic to be reminded of Harvey's Gang's amazing origins and look towards its exciting future. I hope you enjoy listening. So first off, Malcolm, the founder of Harvey's Gang. Can before we get into Harvey's Gang, just tell us a little bit about yourself, Malcolm, because you've got a fascinating backstory.
Well, thanks very much, Rob. I hope you can all hear me. Good.
Yep, can hear you
excellent.
perfectly.
Well, I'm a biomedical scientist, now retired, and started work in laboratories back in 1976, so well before most people were born, it seems. And been around the world a bit with Royal Navy, etc., and fascinated with biomedical science my whole career. And I came down, luckily, to Worthing in 2006 and found my dream job working in blood transfusion next to the seaside, where I could actually go for a swim in the tide at lunchtime or whatever time lunch was, if I managed to get a break. And life was good. And we were building through CPA and UCAS and things like that. And life was very good for me. Settled down, bought a house down here, and we settled, and it was the place to be. I then was asked out of the blue if I could give a laboratory tour to a young patient. And I said, yeah, no worries. We can do that, organise something, sure. And little did I know. And it started with this young lad called Harvey. Now, prior to this, Harvey, who was 6 at the time, had come down the South Downs, which is just outside of Brighton and Worthing. And he'd come down on a toboggan because we had snow. And he got down to the bottom and was completely exhausted. And that's really strange for a 6-year-old boy who would have been full of beans and full of life, theoretically, and would have been racing back up to the top to get on the...
Oh, I think you might have accidentally muted yourself there for a second.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So he came down the toboggan, down the South Downs, and was completely shattered. He looked a wee bit pale, and his mum and dad said, well, we'll take him to the GP, just get him checked out. He's got a bit of a cold by the look of it. Took him to the GPs, and he took one look at him and said, well, actually, I think he's a bit too pale. Take him to A&E and get him, get some blood tests done and get him looked at. So they went to A&E and they gave him a workover, took some blood samples, and he asked what the samples were for. And he went away. And as usual, the A&E said, the results will be back at your GPs within a couple of weeks. Just go to your GPs and pick the results up from there. And that was it. However, 2 hours later, they got a phone call at home to say Harvey's hemoglobin was a little bit on the low side. In new money, that was 36 grams per litre. And we know that is very low. We'd be expecting 130 in the ideal world. So they said that he needs more samples taken that evening and he needs an urgent blood transfusion. So he came back in with his mum and dad and they took more samples, which curiosity struck with Harvey, saying, well, you've had those coloured samples this afternoon. Why do you want some more? And obviously we needed the second group and save sample for our safe transfusion practice. And he asked questions of the nursing staff. They admitted him through up to the paediatric ward and requested a unit and a half of blood for that evening. It turned out his blood group was AB RHD pos, which is not something we usually hold much of on the shelf in Worthing. So we had to get an urgent delivery down from NHSBT at Tooting. We organised him to have that unit and a half of blood that evening, and he had samples taken afterwards to check that his haemoglobin had stabilised. And needless to say, that was more questions. And he kept asking questions about what was happening. Behind the scenes in the laboratory, we did further tests, as we do, and we diagnosed him with what we thought was acute myeloid leukemia. And he subsequently started his chemotherapy and then went on to have shared care with the Royal Marsden, our local cancer specialist for the South Coast at that time. And Harvey underwent total body irradiation, and he received a bone marrow transplant, which was donated by his 14-year-old brother, Max. And we didn't see Harvey for 12, 14 months, so we didn't know any of this was actually going on in the background. And then 14 months later, we received a group and save as part of his routine process of him not feeling so well. And his blood group showed up as a RHD neg. And obviously that to us went, oh, this is a bit of a red flag. What's going on here? Don't know anything about it. And hence knowing then about the bone marrow transplant and the shared care. So we set the irradiated flag up, looked at the hematology results and went, oh, sugar, not so good. And it was obvious to the laboratory biomedical scientists that his bone marrow transplant had started to fail, which is never good news. So we regularly transfused him with units of red cells and platelets, and unfortunately he went into a period of palliative care. And we looked after him as best we could, all the way to working with Derriford Hospital down in Plymouth, where we got his last transfusion out to the campsite, Caravan Park, where he had his last platelet transfusion, blood transfusion out on the Caravan Park, surrounded by his family, and there he passed away. And they had his farewell at the crematorium in Worthing, and the paediatric play specialist said, Malcolm, are you going to this Harvey's farewell? I went, no, really, I hadn't thought about that, thanks. And they went, oh, we think you should. Oh, why? I had no idea. So yes, okay, we'll go. And I went, only to be confronted there with over 2,000 people at the crematorium. And on the big LCD screen in the crematorium was a picture of him and I up on the wall with his Monsters Inc. coffin and them playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow by Eva Cassidy, which absolutely floored me. Had no idea any of this had gone on, and couldn't understand a word of it, and any part of it. And his parents thanked me for everything I'd done for him and Harvey and his parents and his siblings, which I didn't know I'd done anything. And the consultant paediatrician came across and said, Malcolm, thanks, you did a superb job. We got 7 more kids that could do with a tour. That was a bit of a shake-up. And it was a case of, well, what did I do? I really didn't understand it. Well, Harvey had had a tour. You showed him exactly what happens to his blood samples, what machine is used, what the machines are called, who the biomedical scientists were. You showed him where the samples came down in the air tube and how the sample tubes went back. You showed him that you were a caring team that looked after him and his family and were there for him all the way through his journey. You gave him a white coat. All right, it was huge. It came down to his ankles, which ideally wasn't much good. But he'd walked from the laboratory back up to the paediatric ward in his white coat, introducing himself as Harvey, a trainee biomedical scientist, as he walked past all the staff and the visitors, introducing himself, lording it over doctors and nurses because he was a scientist. Absolutely unbelievable. He got back to the paediatric ward, and where we'd given him a cardboard ID badge, he used that to get through the magnetic card strip holder of the paediatric ward. We all know that that theoretically would never have opened. However, the nurse on the inside saw him, tried to do that, and pressed the button on the inside, and the doors opened. But to Harvey, his ID badge, because he was a scientist, got him through those doors. And there was nothing he could not do. There was no questions he could never answer of his peers or his friends about what happens in laboratories, because if he didn't have the answer, he knew somebody somewhere would have the answer for him, and we could feed back those answers. And we empowered him to take care of his care all the way through his care with us. And at the end of it, we had this 7 other kids that could do with a tour. However, that was a hell of a surprise to me. And as biomedical scientists, we're quite good at reflecting, and that's what we did. Personally, I had to do that over a few beers because I was in bits. What was good? Well, the tour, that went really well. The meeting the paediatric team and the laboratory people coming out from the laboratory, meeting others, helping the children, helping the siblings and the families. What was not so good was the lab coat. We don't have children's-sized lab coats. His came down to his ankles, and that was the smallest one we had. So we had to do something about that. The cardboard ID badge, well, that was on a random NHS lanyard that we'd found. Well, we need to do something about that. We need proper ID badges. We need goodie bag. I had an IBMS Congress meeting bag that I used and put bits and pieces in. We needed pens because everybody, including every BMS you've ever met, biomedical scientist, I apologise, has always got pens in their pocket, and they are squirrels for hiding and borrowing other people's pens. A notebook to go in his pocket, it always could have had to. And we needed a name to remember Harvey by. So the idea of Harvey's gang came up. We made our first white coat made of a NHS threadbare NHS white sheet that we were going to throw away. And they were couture coats made to measure for future kids. We contacted our security department, arranged for proper ID badges with the picture of a Harvey's gang logo that would be in the picture as opposed to being a child. We contacted Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, and they wanted to get behind us and help us with the goodie bags and the contents of the goodie bags. Lab Cold, bless them, who we all use their fridges and freezers in blood transfusion. They lent us and gave us Lab Cold penguins, and eventually, very kindly, made orange Harvey's Gang penguins. Our porters, who are our NHS heroes everywhere, who do so much and never seen, they got involved as well because they were taking the charge to and from laboratories and to and from meetings. It'd be nice for them to be involved in that tour. Our communication department, who are key to be able to get our story out there. And so we all arranged with all of this stuff. But that got us outside of the doors in our laboratories. Well, we don't do that, do we? We all know that, laboratories are, grade 9 security, doors never to be passed, normally in the cellars, never to be seen. Well, actually, we're highly qualified individuals that have got skills that could be used elsewhere. And because of this, we now get invited to talk and participate in various communication areas like committees. So we put all of that together, and what did we do? We tried it out, and we had William, who was 4, and he came down to us 7 days later. So on the 31st of October 2014, he came down to us. It was Halloween, so he'd had Halloween spiders put on his face, and he came down for a tour, and that was a real success. So we then said, right, this is something that we could get behind to do these other 6 children now. And we had our trust communication department that came, and they invited the BBC to join them. And we met Francesca Evans-Jones, a lady with Fanconi's anemia. And she was 8. Now, when you think you know children and know children's questions, This 8-year-old, Francesca, asked me a question which I will never, ever be able to forget. Malcolm, do you ever think we'll be able to grow solid organs from stem cells? Wow. What a question. An 8-year-old. Amazing. So we were filmed on the BBC and we got filmed locally out on the South Downs News, which was great. And then I got asked to present at local meetings and regional meetings and then national meetings. And we got noticed and we won awards. And I won awards for what we'd done. And we'd started the Harvey's Gang tours in November 2014. And we were getting a little bit too big in 30-odd sites to be able to make these coats ourselves. So we became a charity. And I then formed a charity with Harvey's mum and dad and my wife and I and a friend who was a childcare nurse. And we became a registered charity. And we started Harvey's Gang Tours, expanding that. And we are now in 142 sites around most of the UK and further afield, the furthest of which is in Tasmania. And I'm just blown away by, the experience of to get that big. And personally, it's changed my life. I was a biomedical scientist, and then I took retirement at 60 to be able to give my time as a volunteer to Harvey's Gang to continue building it, and to build it to 142 sites since 2019 is remarkable. And it's been fabulous meeting and talking with so many incredible biomedical scientists, healthcare scientists, MLAs, doctors, who are really interested in find out what happens in our laboratories and how they can get involved and how their laboratories can get inside of their local laboratories to show their children. And it's remarkable how we've seen children from various diseases to needle phobias, to actually curing needle phobia. It's just incredible what journey that those patients and those parents have had. I mean, a sample's taken urgently one afternoon, and it takes 2 hours to get the result. Well, the parents worry sick for those 2 hours. Usually our turnaround for urgents, but the afternoon is when all the GP workload arrive, and everything gets caught up in the backlog. There was no bad results on the patient that day. However, for 2 hours, the parents were petrified. They didn't know what was going on. A doctor couldn't answer those questions. A nurse couldn't. We could. And because of the tours, parents understand these things because they've got an in to the laboratory to understand what actually happens to our samples and where they results go back to via the laboratory information systems to the hospital mainframe. So that's what I have done with friends, with my colleagues, with the help of organisations like Orthoclinical Diagnostics, LabCold, with NHSBT, with the drivers of the NHSBT taking boxes of Harvey's Gang lab coats and goodie bags around to the various laboratory sites, with friends trying to drive through town with Harvey's Gang boxes to get them to the post office to take them up to Scotland or to Wales or over to Northern Ireland where NHSBT don't deliver. So I hope that gives you an idea of what I've done, and I've possibly rabbited on a little bit too much and nobody's got a word in edgeways yet.
Oh, no, not at all, Malcolm. I think that's the perfect way to start off with, just a detailed talk through of your experiences from the start to the finish. And it's an incredibly emotional story, and it's quite hard to listen to without welling up and getting a lump in your throat. I mean, is it something where you feel emotional telling it? Is it hard to tell, or come quite easily?
No. It's a measured delivery here at this end with a lump in my throat and tears running down the eyes. That remembrance of Harvey with the picture of him and I, and not understanding what I had done, and that still takes a lot of getting used to. And those laboratories that do Harvey's Gang tours, they feel so emotionally involved and invested into these tours that some wonder whether they've done the right thing. And you see a patient and their sibling going through and chatting and talking about what's your white cell count today, your neutrophil count. Oh, it's 0.6. Great, that means we can have chemotherapy today. I mean, that's being talked about by a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old sibling. This is unbelievable. This is something I'd never thought that you'd have those conversations or overhearing that sort of conversation. It's unbelievable.
No, I mean, it must be, while there's all the hard emotional stuff to deal with, there must be an incredible sense of satisfaction seeing these kids discussing these things in their lab coats.
Very much so. It's incredible to say that because of these tours, they've been empowered to talk and be listened to. When patients are diagnosed, doctors and nurses talk to parents. They don't talk to the children. They don't sort of get down on one knee and talk eye to eye to the children to try and explain, because a child will never understand these things, will they? Well, we don't know, do we? Because we never try. But all of a sudden, and the fact that we live in this IT world that we do, Dr. Google, these kids learn and know so much, and they just want to be part of that involvement. So they actually feel empowered to participate in their own healthcare.
Amazing. So, do you have to switch into a different mindset, Malcolm? I mean, when I'm at work, my head is kind of littered with jargon and terminology, and all of a sudden, if a kid came along and said, "Explain to me what you were doing," I would have to kind of take a step back. I mean, is it a different side of you to the scientific side, or how does that work?
I think, you do sort of try to sort of think about how you put it into more simpler terms. We had a youngster that we had a tour at Southampton when we launched Harvey's Gang at Southampton, and he had a Wilms tumour. And I went, "Oh, okay, how do you explain this?" And the consultant nephrologist said, "Malcolm," she said, "just imagine you've got your 2 kidneys are a bank of, they're a laundrette full of thousands of washing machines, and they've all got leaky taps." I went, "Oh." And she said, "That's what a Wilms tumour is." I went, "Good grief." Okay. Yeah. So we've all got ways of explaining things, but down in the lab, we've always been scientific to be able to explain our results to our colleagues, our registrars, SPRs, and consultants of what we're seeing, what we're doing. We dumb it down a little bit, and I don't mean that derogatory. We dumb it down a little bit when we talk to our other clinical colleagues that are not maybe clinical with laboratory results, maybe our nursing staff that understand the nursing side, which we possibly don't so much. But we try to get the message across what the actual result means and what it could mean. And so we tried to do that. So we're used to doing that things, and all we're doing is sort of dumbing it down a little bit and trying to think of other ways to get the same message across, but in simpler English terms rather than swallowing a thesaurus.
Brilliant. And I'm sure everyone here listening knows, but maybe some people don't know that the IBMS is now the official custodian of Harvey's Gang. They've taken over the kind of running of it. Tell us about how that happened, Malcolm, and also how you kind of felt handing the reins over.
Thanks, Rob. I mean, I am over the moon that we as Harvey's Gang have secured the long-term future of Harvey's Gang. I am getting older, finding it more difficult to get everything together and making sure the sites were fully equipped for doing the tours. Yeah, we did have COVID for 2.5, 3 years that have quietened a lot of things down and quietened a lot of the expansion down. But if it had been full blown, I would not have been able to cope with the amount of sites. So 142 sites is remarkable. And if all of those sites all of a sudden started doing tours, on a weekly basis, that would be a full-time job. And, I'm retired. There's only me down here out of our storage unit. And so therefore, long term, we needed a solution. The IBMS, for me, was the ideal solution. A big professional organization that lives and breathes and takes the biomedical science of this world forward. And they were perfect fit for me to believe that they were the ones, custodians, that would take us forward long term, securely, knowing that, they were professional, would keep it on a level keel, keeping it going, helping all of the sites, helping biomedical scientists everywhere promote Harvey's Gang, as well as promoting biomedical science. And this was an ideal fit for Harvey's Gang. And luckily, thankfully, the hierarchy and the council of the IBMS agreed with me that this was the way forward, and they voted in to take us forward, which was great. So they've now got all of our goodie bags, etc., ready to go out. They will be the first point of contact. I'm not disappearing. I'm available. I'm here to help, as always, because this is my long-term goal, long-term dream. I want Harvey's Gang to be part of routine children's healthcare. That a diagnosis of something that needs blood tests or needs other tests within laboratories, that they should be able to get a Harvey's Gang tour of a local laboratory that should be able to explain what goes on with their samples, meet the people that do all of the tests, to understand what goes on and where it goes. And the IBMS being behind that now, taking it forward, is just awesome. Absolutely awesome. So very, very pleased.
Oh, brilliant. So it sounds like it's all going to be moving in the same direction, but with a bit more clout and without you having to take so much strain, Malcolm.
Yes, and that's the hope. And if I'm honest, more professionalism. I'm one person with one computer that went wrong, and trying to get everything done on one computer, as well as do the blogs, as well as doing the stories and the tweets and everything else, was hard work. I'm not complaining, don't get me wrong, but that's why I took my retirement and did it as a volunteer, because I firmly believe in it. But now I can take more of a back step and perhaps enjoy the success of other sites and enjoy the success of tours of laboratories and see more about what the children are doing. And some of the stories I hear and see are just fantastic. When they launched in King's in London, a young lad there of 11 years old had 107 transfusions because of sickle cell anemia. I mean, that's remarkable. Yeah. Absolutely remarkable. And as a professional down on the south coast, where we don't see sickle cell anemia very often, that's that's hard to get your head round.
Brilliant. We've had a couple of comments that have come in. First of all, one from Carl, who I think is a regular on here. Hello, Carl. He says it's just a comment. What Harvey's Gang achieves in terms of empowering patients is nothing short of brilliant. It also encourages us caregivers to put our best foot forward and really put the patients at the centre of everything. Completely agree, Carl. We've got a question from Michelle, who's often on here as well. Hello, Michelle. She said, I wanted to know, how do you explain terms to young children? What sort of words do you use instead? So maybe kind of a little bit of an expansion of what you were saying before, Malcolm.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the white cells and what they do. We talk about neutrophils, lymphocytes, basophils, etc. However, to the young patients, we talk about, these white cells, with the sort of knobbly heads on them that look like parents or look like, friends from school or teachers. They go around, looking after you by looking at, trying to find the bacteria that might be trying to get inside your body. We talk about lymphocytes and, what they do, and say, well, particularly now because of COVID, we say, well, these are the good ones that would look after you during COVID, or, fight other viruses like your chicken pox. We talk to them about the platelets. Well, those are sticky things, and a young lady who ran tours at the Royal Sick Kids in Edinburgh had a jar of olive oil with Cheerios and couscous in, and she could shake them up, and the Cheerios looked like red cells and the couscous looked like platelets, and you could see the various size differences floating around in the olive oil, and she was able to explain how they came across, and when they came to a plug hole, they all clogged up, and they all clogged up to stop your bleeding. So we were able to show them and explain it using something as simple as that. And I thought that particular laboratory had fantastic. So they were very good.
Oh, brilliant. And just before we are, I've got a quick quote from David Wells here, Chief Executive of the IBMS, which is just about what we're talking about, and the IBMS taking over custodianship. And he says, we were keen to make sure that the Harvey's Gang initiative would not be lost. We can see that it adds real value to our organisation and to our members because they clearly enjoy the tours and showing children around their laboratories. In terms of engaging with the public, it is also an excellent way of showing off the work that we all do. I'm confident that our members will support what we're doing and see it as a good thing for the IBMS to get involved with. We can run Harvey's Gang in a way that holds true to its values and build on its success. So it sounds like, yes, the plan is to carry on doing more of what you're doing, Malcolm.
Yeah, no, I completely agree and concur with David's words. It is fantastic. We had a fair down in Worthing, and this young lad came running across to me and shouting my name for some apparent reason. And his mum, eventually caught up with him, and he gave me a hug. And it was then that I realised that this was a young lad that we'd given a Harvey's Gang tour a few years ago, and he was deaf. And his mum explained that, he still loved it. Unfortunately, his Harvey's Gang coat was too small for him now. And we were out in public, showing what Harvey's Gang do, and we had a spare coat, so I gave him a coat that fitted. He wouldn't take it off for the rest of the day. He was there for the whole day, walking around with thousands of people in his Harvey's Gang white coat. It was just he was over the moon, and
lovely. That's
what you're able to do is, show that we're humans. We're involved in children's healthcare, properly involved. It's not a samples and numbers game. We do billions of tests a year. We know that, and we're in it for the right reasons. But sometimes, because we do these billions of tests, the reasons get a bit blurred. You can put a patient's name and a face to something, and all of a sudden it's so meaningful. We have a Harvey's Gang tour, and I guarantee you will walk out of work that day, possibly late or probably late, because you've had such a good day showing these youngsters around, or youngster around and their family. And you'll be feeling 10 foot tall. You'll be walking on air over the moon, and you'll get home and you'll talk about it. And you'll talk about it to other people, saying, what an incredible day you've just had.
Fantastic. And we've got a couple of comments from Philippa Jane Burns. Hello there, Philippa, who says, how amazing will it be to watch these children and see how these experiences influence how they manage their condition and how they develop. And she also says, really pleased the IBMS has adopted this innovation. It will allow the tours to grow and develop, which I completely agree. And on that point, it seems like a really good moment to bring in Zoe and Rebecca, two of our co-hosts today, who have also had experience of running tours. So maybe because she appears first on my screen and her mic has just gone off, Zoe, how are you doing?
Hiya, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly, thanks. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight, Zoe and Rebecca. Zoe and Rebecca, let's go Zoe first, but Rebecca, I'll ask you in a sec. how and why did you first get involved in Harvey's gang?
I first heard of Harvey's gang when I moved to Guernsey, which was in 2018. And the concept of it, I thought, was brilliant, because when you're a parent and you have been through the healthcare system a lot because you've had children with issues, the thought that that could have been there for them when they needed blood tests and stuff, it would have just made things a lot more easier for them. So to me, it was a bit of a no-brainer, but I had to get people's buy-in because I was still quite new in the lab. And I was just a lab tech, and I just thought maybe they wouldn't take me seriously. So I applied for what we call the Insurance Corporation Award. So if they like the idea, they'll give you a small amount of funding. And I got second place. So I used the funding for the teddy microbes to show the children what different infections and pathogens look like. So it's a real driver, I think, if you're a parent and you have been there when your child's been ill and they've struggled to get blood and you've been in and out of hospital, and it's sort of like an icebreaker because we have the same thing in common, that we have all been children. And it is difficult at first, and the tours are never going to be, they're never going to be perfect because you're trying to engage children of different ages and different understandings. But it is like using analogies that the children understand. So like one analogy I'll use if I'm showing them down the microscope is, which I actually use on a daily basis as a trainee scientist, but I explain to them like aspergillus is like looking at daisies. And I also have to do some of the chemistry work. So I do the fecal occult blood testing. So I explain to them how a sphere latex turbidity is like dipping a lolly in sherbet.
Right, yeah, nice.
So to me, it's about showing children, especially on a small island, that we also exist. So you could have a career as a scientist.
Brilliant. And were you nervous when you did your first tour? Like I would. I think I'd be absolutely petrified.
I was absolutely petrified, and because it was the first tour, and she was only literally just turning 4, but that was also a learning curve because I was like, right, okay, I think 4 is going to be the youngest, because she really enjoyed it, but she did get disengaged. So it's sort of like targeting things based on how well it's going to be received for the age of the child. But you learn through experience. So like now, I have like a checklist. I call it the right T's. It's just like an acronym. So it's TEAS. So I look at the timing, the environment, the accessibility, and staff participation. I email the parents and get a bit of background about the children. And also because I've got autistic children, I try and find out if there's anything, whether they have any sensory issues, because the labs are loud and they're bright, and the time that they come in, it could be when we've had a delivery. So it's just about getting everything ticked off so you're getting the tour right.
Brilliant. That sounds very good. And Rebecca, how did you first get involved, Rebecca?
Hi. So I first got involved in Harvey's gang around about 2017. That's when we first started having the conversations in Manchester, and our laboratory director had heard about it. I'd heard about it, and we were talking one day randomly about, could we do Harvey's gang in Manchester? We know how the NHS is, it can be quite corporate, can't it? So we had to go through various meetings and speak to various people to see if we could do this. And we're quite lucky in Manchester that we've got the Children's Hospital as one of our sites as well. So we went over to the Children's Hospital and discussed it with the play specialist team. And they said that if we wanted to start tomorrow, they could give us probably 20 patients straight away who would be really interested in coming around the lab. Yeah. So it began, and it was just before I think Malcolm got his big award on the One Show, because I remember engaging with Malcolm, then finding out about that, and I think we started our first tour just after it, around April 2018. I got really lucky because our first, as we call them, VIP, was a little girl called Emmy, who was 8 years old, and she probably knew more haematology than some of the haematologists I work with. She was amazing. I couldn't tell her anything. So she came on, she was absolutely delightful, came around the lab, asked lots of questions. And as much as, and we've been talking a lot about Harvey's gang, obviously it's for the patient, and it's really brilliant for these children. But what I did get out of that first tour was how much it was for the parents as well. So some of the questions the parents were asking, why does it take so long for the blood to get cross-matched, and why did they ask for a repeat sample on my patient, and what training have you done to be a biomedical scientist, and how do we know that blood result's right? As a parent myself, those are the sort of questions I would ask. And I think it really gave the laboratory staff the opportunity to kind of show their knowledge, show how professional they were, and show their experience, and really reassure the parents that their child was in good care. So for me, that was really important, a really important part of the tour. And another bit was the staff. So one, the laboratory staff. So after the first one, we didn't expect it, but what we noticed was the morale in the laboratory afterwards was really high. And there was like a buzz around the lab. I think everybody was just so happy and everyone was smiling. But then also the other thing we noticed was the more and more staff were asking to come and have tours around the lab. So the place specialists, the nurses on the wards, or doctors who've not been in the lab before. So it gave us an opportunity to show other members of other healthcare professionals around the hospital what goes on behind the scenes as well. So they'd come with the child as part of those tours and ask questions too. So it's really beneficial to the whole community in the hospital environment. And I'd really urge any hospital that's thinking of taking these tours on to do it. I picked up on a couple of things that were said before. I think, Zoe, when you mentioned about patients who were possibly neurodiverse, and we had needle phobia patients, our place specialists were really keen to use the tours for patients with needle phobia or neurodiverse patients who were scared of hospitals. And so one of the things we did was the place specialist came in and made a little video of the laboratory during a quiet time, so that they could show the patients what it was like in a laboratory before they came down. And then also I would make an effort to go and speak to the patient and meet them before the tour, so I could get an idea of any issues that we needed to be aware of on the tour, and that really helped. So we had a lot of patients that came to tour the lab because they were frightened of needles, and I think it really did help their understanding of where that sample was going and what tests were being done. And one of our patients was a little boy called Logan, who was extremely needle phobic. He came on the tour, he absolutely loved the microscopes, spent a lot of time with the microscopes, and he noticed that one of our analyzers wasn't named. If anyone's worked in a lab, you'll know that we name all our analyzers. And one of them didn't have a name on because it was new, and he insisted on naming it. So while he was there, he named it. We went and printed a picture off the internet, and we stuck it on, and it was called the Mystery Machine, named by Logan. And after his tour, the nurse said to him, "Are you going to have your bloods taken now?" He said, "Yeah, take me along, I'll go and get them done." And that was a brilliant moment, just to see how much of a difference it had made. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we've had a couple more comments come in. Sorry, I'm aware I sound a bit like a second-rate kind of talk radio host when I'm saying that, so apologies. But we've had a message from Fiona Floyd, who said, we used to take some of our child patients around the lab as a result of one of the play therapists requesting we do so. The parents came too, and it was always so successful and everyone benefited. I'm so glad that Harvey's gang has come about, and now the IBMS are taking it on board. And another comment from Michelle, who agrees with a few comments we've had tonight for both Zoe and Rebecca. Being a parent definitely makes a difference. We know what it's like to be in the hospital and wait for the results. I think about the parents as well as the child when doing tests and looking at the results. Completely agree, and really good comments. Zoe or Rebecca, whichever one of you wants to jump in, was it logistically a tricky thing to sort out getting the tours? I mean, what's the process like from the moment where you first thought, I want to start doing these tours, to the moment you're on the first one? Is there a long time? Is there a lot of admin for those people who are interested in doing this, but a bit time poor, possibly?
I think I emailed Rebecca, if I'm right.
Yeah, you did.
So I
Nice.
I emailed Rebecca and I asked for her help, basically. I have no shame. So I was just, she sent me, like, how would you explain it? Some forms, for the parents to sign to say they were happy if we used any images, if they weren't happy, if they didn't want them to go on social media. So that was a good thing, because when you collaborate with other people, you will find things that you haven't even thought about, and then it actually really makes sense. So it wasn't as daunting as I thought, because I emailed Rebecca and because I had the experience of having children. And so no, it wasn't bad at all. In fact, it was quite plain sailing, and Malcolm got the stuff across quite fast.
Mm-hmm. Oh, brilliant! And then, how often are you doing tours these days? Is it kind of a weekly thing? Is it something that happens monthly? How regularly are the tours for either of you? Maybe Rebecca, because I was just chatting then. Rebecca, how often are you doing tours?
I think so in Manchester we haven't done any recently, but we did find that we were getting them in peaks and troughs, so usually coinciding with the school holidays. And quite often these children, because they've been poorly and they've been in hospital, they don't want to take time off school during term time. So we'd find that during the summer holidays we'd get quite a lot, but in the space of 18 months that we did it just pre-COVID, we had 20 tours. So it was averaging over about one a month, I think. And just following on from what Zoe was saying before, I was terrified on my first tour, and I've shown loads of people around the lab, but I was absolutely terrified something was going to go wrong, and I got lucky with Emmy. But as we did more of them, you get into a bit of a groove, and you realise the sort of stuff that you need. And the consent forms was really important, because obviously if you're going to take pictures and you want to sort of write articles or promote it around the trust or even on Twitter, you need to make sure that the parents are happy for that to happen, that they can withdraw consent anytime. And the other thing for me, really important, and even more so probably now post-COVID, was the risk assessment, and just making sure there's not any extra needs. For example, the child could be in a wheelchair, and you may need to make sure you've got, some labs are quite small, aren't they? To make sure you've got easy access into the lab, are face masks required, etc. So yeah, consent forms and risk assessments were probably the most important things when setting up a tour. But I'd be happy to share stuff if anybody's interested in information after this.
Thanks, Rebecca. Sorry, Rob. Just to follow on that, really, it's something that I firmly believe in is do once and share, and that's the whole idea of Harvey's Gang. In the fact that initially we've got the risk assessment and the communication form and the form to go out to the parents to explain things. But then it can always be improved, and people like Rebecca have improved the risk assessments and then shared that. So the next person has got a lot of the work already done for them, and it's all editable format, so they can take out their trust logo and you can put your trust logo in, and then all of a sudden those forms are fit for purpose and they belong to you as your trust. So that I think is very important, that we're in this together, and the idea is we try and standardize everything as much as we can to make sure all kids get a tour which is similar, not necessarily identical, because each child and their siblings and parents have got their own needs and requirements and questions, which is understandable. You also mentioned there about the machines and the names. We've got a blood grouping machine which was called Harvey, and that was the first ortho vision in the world, and we got it named after Harvey. And the second one we got was named Jack, after another tourist. And we've got one which is going to be named over at Chichester Hospital, which will be named Toby after our first patient in Chichester. And he needed a heart valve transplant or a heart transplant. And he came round in a wheelchair. And as you say, Rebecca, it's really good to get youngsters around in wheelchairs because they see a different area of the lab than those that maybe don't, who are walking. And risk assessment wise, you check where your sharps bins are and etc. But we're going to name that machine Toby, and he was the biomedical scientist trainee that launched Harvey's Gang at Great Ormond Street. So it's going on to name machines and name them after patients rather than, our haematology machines like everybody else. I mean, ours are Wallace and Gromit and Buzz and Woody, and in chemistry, they've got Thingy 1 and Thingy 2. But naming them after patients, it can be scary, yes, but you as a trust can get a lot out of naming a machine after a patient or a family. And, all of these stories put the NHS, particularly pathology within the NHS, in such positive light. They're good news stories that need to be shared and told.
Oh, definitely. And that chimes in nicely. We've had a comment come in from Deborah, the IBMS president. Good evening, Deborah, who says, apologies for my lateness. She hasn't just sent that now, by the way. That was at least 10 minutes ago, so she's not as late as she might seem. But amazing to hear the Harvey's Gang stories and the impact it has on patients, parents, and our pathology staff. And yeah, to Malcolm, Zoe, and Rebecca, it does seem to have an incredible impact across the board. What kind of started off with an aim to improve the life and understanding of one child impacts so many different areas. Were you surprised that it affected the parents, the pathology staff, and then you're getting other workers in the hospital coming in to see the labs? Were you surprised, all of you, by the impact that's had?
Yeah, massively. But not just in the hospital and not just the parents. So last year, the careers department here found out about the tours and asked me to go do mystery guest slots for primary schools where they had to spend half an hour, and I could only answer yes or no. And I'm telling you, even as an adult, that is really difficult game. But I had to answer yes or no every time they asked me a question till they could get to what I did. And honestly, they found it so hard. And because Guernsey is a small island, some of them were just like, are there scientists here? Yeah. And then that gets the cogs whirring in their mind, because sometimes when it's such a small community, the idea of having not big aspirations, but big ideas about career paths, you might think, oh, I can't do that and live here, but you can.
Brilliant. And Rebecca, are there any particular areas that you felt it having an impact on, whether that's other areas of staff or the wider public or kind of the profile of the profession, or even your colleagues in the lab? Where do you think it has had an impact aside from the children who are going on the tours and their families?
No, I think you're right, Zoe, following on from what Zoe said about taking it out to the wider community, because I hadn't really thought of doing it before, but after Harvey's Gang, I too went out to schools and to do some of the sort of careers fairs now, tell people about science. And I did my daughter was in beavers, so the lab lent me a microscope and I went to beavers and took some of the cartoons and colouring sheets I'd used for Harvey's Gang and modified it for the beavers, and put some washing up liquid in a bottle with some kidney beans and some butter beans to try and recreate blood. Just to try and get children engaged in science at a very young age. So it does have a wider impact on us as well, I think, hosting those tours and our way of thinking.
Oh, brilliant. And Malcolm, if people are listening this evening and they think this all sounds amazing, which I'm sure everyone will be doing, how do they go about getting involved? What's the first step to do if they want to launch Harvey's Gang tours in their hospital?
The first step is to contact Harvey's Gang, and the Harvey's Gang at IBMS.org is the new email, or go through the harveysgang.com website, which will then pass you across to the IBMS and the email address. And send us an email to say where you're at, and give us an email address, and we'll contact you. And that'll be the first stage, and we'll talk you through, help you through, and be able to support you through starting, suggesting who to visit, who to contact, who to help, to get the tours going. It is important that we keep this going. And following back on your question earlier, I've been to Harvey's old junior school a few times to do lectures to the whole of the school. It helps with staff retention and keeping staff going past their retirement as well within laboratories and areas that within hospitals. We had 18 Harvey's Gang young visitors in Birmingham Children's Unit that were based in the PKU Metabolic Diseases Unit, and they all dressed as scientists in Harvey's Gang coats and came down for a look around their laboratory within a day. 9 in the morning, 9 in the afternoon. Absolutely remarkable. Who would have thought that a number of years ago when we first started?
And we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to go around you all and just ask for one sentence as to why people should get involved in Harvey's Gang. Let's kick off with you, Malcolm, because you're unmuted and speaking anyway. Malcolm, if someone's listening, why should they get involved in Harvey's Gang tours?
Because we make a difference with everything that we do within laboratory medicine, but people don't understand it, and we perhaps don't understand the patient side, and this actually rounds the circle beautifully and gives you such a good factor about your working life.
Fantastic. And Zoe, and feel free to repeat things, Zoe, because I realise there's 3 of you answering exactly the same question when there's one kind of quite obvious answer. But Zoe, what do you think?
2 things. Obviously, it's patient focused, but it's happiness, because it doesn't just make the kids happy, the parents happy, it makes the staff happy, and it makes science more accessible to the younger generation. Because when I was at high school, I wasn't a brilliant student and I just thought I would never get it. But if I'd have had the opportunity as a child to actually sort of see behind the scenes, it probably wouldn't have felt as daunting.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And Rebecca, any final thoughts, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think if you want to raise the morale in your laboratory, definitely do Harvey's Gang, and it'll probably be one of the most proudest things you do in your career, because it is for me. It makes me smile every time I think about it. So yeah, absolutely go for it.
Fantastic. I could not agree more. Did you have a last comment there, Malcolm?
I do. I'd just like to thank both Rebecca and Zoe for being such incredible Harvey's Gang stalwarts, in the fact that what they've done is they deserve awards, because they've taken it forward, and it knows no bounds of what they've done to these children and their parents and their siblings. What they've done to children's healthcare is amazing, and highlighting what we do in laboratories, fantastic.
Brilliant. And I completely agree. Zoe, Rebecca, Malcolm, thank you so much for your time. It's been incredibly, quite humbling actually to speak to you all tonight and hear these stories. And yeah, thank you so much for the time. And I'm sure everyone would like to thank Malcolm for starting off this whole thing and creating such an amazing initiative that will go on to change the lives of so many children and families and biomedical scientists as well, and raising the profile. And I could go on and on and on, but we've got about 30 seconds left. So just Malcolm, Zoe and Rebecca, thank you for all the great work you do. And if anyone's listening and didn't get the chance... Oh, nice little burst of applause there. If anyone is listening and didn't get the chance to ask any questions or make any comments, then you can always just send them through to me on here. Just drop me a line, do it, and I'll make sure they get to the right people and I'll get you answers. And also, if anyone wants to carry on, I'm sure you can carry on this debate on Twitter, IBMS chat. And but yeah, I believe the official incarnation of this IBMS chat is going to close. But yeah, thank you again, Malcolm, Zoe and Rebecca, and thank you so much everyone for coming along and taking the time to listen tonight. It's been a really great session. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, why not join us live at 8 p.m. on the first Wednesday of every month, where you can listen to the conversation and even join in by asking questions. Just keep an eye on the IBMS Twitter feed and click on the link to join the chat. Alternatively, keep an eye out here for further podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and remember that these podcasts can be used for your CPD. Bye!